Good evening, everyone who has joined us across the globe. I know it's really early morning here in India. Everyone is just reaching their offices, and everyone who are attending from US, it's pretty much very late for them. So I'll take this opportunity to thank you to our speakers today, Rick Smith. Sorry, I've mixed both the names, so it's Corey Smith and Rick Baer. Right, Corey is a Sitecore MVP and solutions architect at Proficient at Atlanta. He enjoys architecting and implementing projects to deliver best of the breed solutions on Sitecore platforms. When Corey is not doing Sitecore development, blocking, or tweeting about it, he can be found traveling the world, gaming on his PC, or spending time with his wife. Right? He's very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, and you can follow him there. Rick Baer, as a Sitecore digital strategy MVP and a Sitecore technical consultant on Proficient's Microsoft Team, Rick provides insights, trainings, and a passion for a fully realized potential of Sitecore customer experience platform. Rick utilizes years of hands-on Sitecore know-how and a certification to help deliver clear solutions and actionable results for marketers, both new to the platform or looking to take it to the next level of maturity. You can also follow Nick on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can find their Twitter and LinkedIn handle on our website, SUGNCR.org. So now I'll pass on the screen to our presenters so that they can start with their wonderful session on Sitecore JavaScript services and marketing automation. Thank you guys for giving us this opportunity to hear you today, and we are looking forward for this session.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That was an excellent introduction.
Thank you.
Awesome. Means I wrote way too much on my LinkedIn profile.
All right, so for everybody that's tuned in, you can see right now up on the screen, we've got 3 URLs. So we're going to take about a minute. We'll have a minute of silence and give everybody an opportunity. Choose your favorite type of music by going to one of these 3 URLs and participate on the forum, and hopefully you can be a winner this morning. So I'll give you guys about a minute to go through that, maybe a minute 30. If some of you would start messaging in chat whenever you're done, that'd be really appreciated.
Your participation really helps with the demo, so we appreciate it.
Yep.
Just if there's a subgenre, you might have that opportunity in there, but I realize these are kind of coarse overall general genres, but it gets us started. Is the data flowing in, Corey?
I don't know, Rick. Just gonna give everybody about 45 more seconds to fill out the form and play around with the site.
All right, I'm just gonna do some webcam jazz lights then.
Sure, the people love that. I don't think they can see us on the feed right now, though.
That's fine. It's just something.
Gopi Krishna is submitted. Appreciate that.
All right.
Give you about 20 more seconds, and then we are going to get started.
And this is the presentation, in case this hasn't already been made clear, that Corey and I did at Symposium in Orlando recently. We had a good crowd. And people seem to enjoy it. We hope you feel the same way.
Okay. This is last call. If you're just joining, take a quick screenshot of this. Go to one of these URLs. Otherwise, we're gonna head on.
Yeah, and
so
speaking of screenshot, if you did take that and somebody does come in late, please share it with them. They can participate. Yep. That's a picture of Corey and I.
No, it's not. So we already had a really good introduction. Again, I'm Corey Smith. You can get used to my voice. Find me on Twitter at SiteCorey. Again, I'm a solutions architect at Proficient Digital. And this morning I'll be presenting with the JSS Gold Master, Rick Bauer.
Nope, you're the JSS Gold Master, Mister. It says so by your name.
Yeah, follow him on Twitter at SiteCordial. We love for you guys to tweet at us. So if you see anything that you like during the presentation or don't like, our Twitter handles are at the bottom of every slide. Tweet at us. We'd love to hear from you.
Please.
Okay, so JavaScript services and marketing automation. Really, the goal of this presentation is for everybody to walk away from this webinar and feel excited and feel comfortable to start building their websites on JavaScript services. As you've played with the demo site that we sent you to earlier, we've built out a full-featured site completely on JavaScript services. It doesn't use MVC at all anywhere, to really prove the fact and drive home the fact that whenever you build a site with JavaScript services, you get all the best things from Sitecore: marketing automation, personalization, A/B testing, et cetera, et cetera. So if after this webinar you feel like, hey, JavaScript services is awesome and we feel comfortable starting our next website tomorrow using JavaScript services instead of MVC, then I'm a happy presenter. One important thing to point out, though, is in this presentation, if you've done anything with marketing automation before, you're probably not going to see anything new. Okay, so JavaScript services isn't going to give any new functionality to marketing automation. It's not going to give any new functionality to personalization. But what it is going to do is it's going to allow you to start building your applications with Angular or React or Vue and enjoy all those things from Sitecore, like the experience editor.
Corey, I lost you for a second, but yeah, I mean, I will add to that, just from a marketer standpoint, kind of what we're looking at here with the JSS and marketing automation is sort of that the backstage view, that JSS piece, and that kind of like the audience view, like what marketers are looking for, and that functionality that comes with it. And as Corey mentioned, yeah, there's not going to be anything new that this adds to Sitecore, but what you're going to see is speed, native feel, that client-side delivery that really helps, not just from a content author standpoint, but from a user standpoint, accelerate that feel of the site, and it really just does feel quite native.
Yep. So real quick, everybody who's on YouTube right now, I'm just kind of curious if you could just say in chat yes or no. How many of you guys listening right now have worked with JavaScript services beyond just setting up the sample site, right? I'm really interested in people who have tried to actually go and do a proof of concept with JSS beyond just installing the sample site. Beyond just installing the sample.
So Corey, in the live mode, the session is delayed by a few seconds, so you might have to wait about 30 seconds or even up to a minute to get the responses on the YouTube chat.
Okay. So far, I've gotten 2 no's. Just a sample site. Okay, cool. So then that's great. Seems like most haven't worked with JavaScript services. So we'll start off by just kind of doing a recap of what JavaScript services is. But before we go into JavaScript services, I want to talk about kind of the history of rendering engines in Sitecore, because that is what JavaScript services is, right? It's really a new rendering engine. It's a new way to build your websites. So if you've been working with Sitecore for a long time, you've probably seen all of the rendering engines, right? XSLT, that's from days long gone by. Nobody does this anymore except for one guy in New Zealand. Web forms, of course, right? Hopefully you're only doing maintenance projects with this and no new projects are being built on web forms. And then, of course, all your new sites today should be built on MVC. Now, there's kind of a common thread between these three, right? They're all server-side rendering engines. That means that whenever you navigate to Sitecore, Sitecore is generating the entire HTML document on the server and then sending it to your browser. Your browser's rendering the HTML. That's been fine. That's been great. But over the past 10 years or so, maybe past several, not quite 10, there's been a movement away from server-side rendering to client-side rendering in the general web development space. Right, we've seen three major players emerge: Angular, Vue.js, and React. All make it very easy for you to build rich client-side applications that, as Rick mentioned earlier, feel a lot faster and feel a lot more native than server-side rendered apps, like an app built with MVC. I think that these sites feel so native, they feel so fast whenever they're rendered client-side. I think that probably within a couple of years, we're going to start saying the same thing about MVC that we say about web forms today, right? Whenever somebody comes to you and talks about web forms, the first thing they say is, don't use web forms, right? Use MVC. I think we're going to be saying that about MVC very soon and say, don't use MVC, use JavaScript services, because the difference in the responsiveness and the native feel of the websites built with JavaScript services is just mind blowing. I know Rick was really excited about that whenever we were building the site out.
I was.
So Angular, Vue.js, and React, again, these are kind of the big three players in the client-side framework spaces right now. JavaScript services supports all of them. They've all got feature parity, right? So if you and your team have already got expertise in one of these, then great, just go with the one you want. You're not losing out on anything by not choosing one of the others. If you're just starting out and you've never used one of these before, I recommend starting with React.js or Vue.js. I built everything in React.js. I think it's pretty awesome, but that's really up to you. But I think one of the things that you're going to get really excited about once you start delving into these is that, just like the Sitecore community, all three of these frameworks have huge communities, right? There's a huge React community, there's a huge Vue community, a huge Angular community. They're all big, they're all awesome. There's a huge just JavaScript community at large that we can start getting involved in, that I feel like, me personally, as a backend developer, I've been kind of shielded from and really haven't had an interest in it in the past. So having this world opened up to me has got me really excited. And in that same vein, not only is it going to open us up to those communities, but it's going to have us start working with a whole new set of colleagues, right? So today, whenever you're looking to bring someone onto your team, if you can't find somebody who's got Sitecore experience, kind of the next best thing is finding a backend .NET developer. Well, JavaScript services is going to enable us to kind of broaden that search. And instead of just looking for backend .NET developers, now we can go and start looking for people who have React experience on their resume, or Angular, or Vue.js. And we can bring them into the fold and start teaching them Sitecore. And they can do just as well as a .NET developer, which I think is pretty awesome.
And a key emphasis there to any hiring managers that might be listening along, this isn't just HTML and CSS developers. You still need to have that JSS, that Angular, React, everything Corey just mentioned. But it can't, this isn't just opening up Sitecore development to HTML and CSS devs front end.
Yep, absolutely. And the last thing I'll hit on here is that for us who are backend developers, this is kind of a scary new world, right? Like picking up one of these new frameworks, but I think they're all pretty easy. Like React was really easy for me to pick up. It felt very, like, coming from an MVC background, it just felt very natural and it was easy. I've heard the same about Vue and the same about Angular. So this is something to get really excited about learning. But the thing that is going to make us able to go and bring these new colleagues in, these front-end developers, is disconnected mode. This is JavaScript services kind of killer feature, right? Your front-end developers, they don't want to work on a Windows box. Your front-end developers do not want to work on their Mac and run Sitecore in a VM. And disconnected mode solves all those problems. So basically what disconnected mode does, in a nutshell, is it lets you build a content-driven site, not just a static wireframe. These aren't mock-ups. Actually build and prototype a fully content-driven site without an instance of Sitecore. So disconnected mode runs on top of a Node.js server, which enables it to run on Windows, run on Mac OS, run on a Linux box. So your front-end devs, they don't have to have Sitecore installed. They can prototype your entire website in disconnected mode on their Mac with no Windows VM, using all the tools that they love, working in the environment that they love, etc. So actually that site that you all navigated to earlier, I built that entire site initially in disconnected mode. Yeah, so let's hop into a demo real quick, and I'll kind of show you what disconnected mode looks like. So I've got that here. Let's see. So yeah, I've got Visual Studio Code open up here on the right. And then this is the site that you guys navigated to earlier, running in disconnected mode. You can see it's running on localhost 3000, right? Sitecore is always running on port 80, or generally is. And whenever you start a site, again, I built this one in React. This is kind of what the site structure is going to look like. I do want to point out, right, front-end developers, they don't like working in Visual Studio. Like Visual Studio 2017, it's not very front-end friendly. So Visual Studio Code's the way to go. You can use Atom or Sublime Text, whatever you like. If you like using Notepad.txt, use that. But yeah, this is what the site looks like whenever you create it. Like this is a disconnected mode site. I wish I had time to kind of go into the nitty gritty of like how the source and the components are built out, but I don't, unfortunately. If you want to see that, go look on YouTube for a video called JSS and Helix. So that's a friend of Rick and mine. His name is Jean-Francois Leroux from Coveo. He actually did a presentation at Sitecore Symposium on JSS and Helix where he covers how these components work together, and he goes into depth in the source folder. So I highly recommend go watch his video that he put up on YouTube if you want to get more details. But really what I want to focus on is just the fact that whenever you build a site in disconnected mode, it's totally content driven. These aren't static wireframes that are like HTML files, right? So the part we're interested in here is this data folder. So this data folder you can kind of think of as your content tree from Sitecore. In JavaScript services, instead of talking about items, they talk about routes. So routes, right? This kind of looks like the content tree. I've got an en.yaml file. This en.yaml file you can kind of think of as just the home item. This is the root item here. This does support multi-language. So you can see this is en.yaml. You could have other languages here and in disconnected mode get multi-language support, but I had no need for that, so didn't enable it. But the rest of this kind of looks like a content tree, right? Like I've got a confirmation route, country route. Each one of the genres has a survey route under it, right? So this kind of mirrors the content tree. And so instead of working with items in Sitecore, you work with these route files. And these route files are just YAML. If you've worked with Rainbow and you've worked with Unicorn, you've seen YAML before. It's probably going to be no surprise that the same guy, Cam Figge, who developed Unicorn and Rainbow, actually is responsible for this file format being here in JavaScript services. And it's really nice to work with. If you don't like YAML for whatever reason, you can use JSON instead. JSON's got kind of some drawbacks that YAML doesn't have, but that's an option as well. But yeah, so this is what an item, quote unquote, looks like in JavaScript services disconnected mode. The anatomy of it looks kind of like an item in Sitecore. You've got an ID. Instead of using a GUID, you can use a string, which makes things a little bit easier. You've got fields on your route. So these are just like fields on your page items, for example. Page title is something that you would have. Picture style, which you can see up here in the browser. And then placeholders, right? This is where things get interesting. So on this route, I've got a header, a main, and a footer placeholder. And then in these placeholders, you can put components. So like in my header, I've got a header default component. So I'm referencing this by ID because there are some other routes that are referencing the same one. Same thing with the footer, right? This component is shared between several routes, so I can just reference it by ID. But you can see here, I've got a component in main, this content, it's called a content block. And it's got some fields on it, right? This is just like your data source items for one of your renderings. It's got a heading and content. So just to kind of prove to you guys that all this stuff on the left-hand side is not static content. It's not just coming from straight HTML. These are all dynamically rendered pages. I'll just type "Good morning, everyone," and once I hit save, thanks to the power of hot reloading, instantly you see the update on the left side. That's pretty sweet. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Like the hot reloading, the first time I saw that, like totally blew my mind. because as a Sitecore developer, I'm so used to like every time I make a change, wait like 30 minutes, for Sitecore to restart. You go on Twitter, forget what I was doing or something. But this is like instant, right? So good morning and thanks for joining. Hit save and bam, like there you go. So this makes it very fast to prototype your sites in Sitecore. The other thing that Rick and I have talked about a bit is just the speed, right? So each one of the client-side frameworks has a different kind of solution to this problem, but I'll focus on React because that's what I used. React has something called a virtual DOM that's an abstraction between the DOM and your code. So whenever you're working in React, you're never working against the DOM directly like you would like in jQuery or whatever. You're actually working against a virtual DOM. And this virtual DOM is pretty cool because anytime you make changes to it, it very intelligently goes and does some calculations and only updates exactly the parts of the DOM that need to change and nothing more. So whenever I'm clicking around the site, for example, this footer is shared between every single route. So when I click around, this footer is never getting re-rendered on each click, right? Like that's all exactly the same. None of this changed. You can see it stays highlighted. And in fact, up here in the header, if I select this text and rhythm and blues fan and I click around, you can see that it stays highlighted because only the content inside of this span right here is getting changed and nothing else. And just to kind of drive the point home, I'll turn off this client side routing and just we can go back to what it would be like with MVC. So if I come in here into this routable Sitecore link that Cam Figgy blogged about, and just turn off client-side routing, right? If I select, pick your music preference here, and then click around, it's a full page refresh, a full flash.
See the
And
flash, yeah.
yeah, it's just not as good of an experience. And your users, they don't know why, but they can notice it and they feel it. It really makes a difference. And I think that alone is worth, hey, let's stop using server-side rendering. Let's move to JSS. Okay, so that's disconnected mode. It's pretty awesome, but it's got its limitations. I mean, at some point, you're going to need marketing automation. You're going to need personalization. Disconnected mode doesn't support that. And Rick wants to get his hands on that as soon as possible. So at some point, you've got to kind of graduate from disconnected mode to what's called connected mode. And I'm going to let Rick kind of talk you through what some of those things are that connected mode allows you to do.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. And just a quick note, I did pop that that JSS and Helix link into the YouTube chat while Corey was going there. So yeah, so this is that backstage piece, right? And we're going to come back to this, but what I want to talk about is connected mode a little bit, or as us marketers, we call it mode. We don't know any other mode. We don't know of the disconnected or the connected. This is just the world that we live in, and it's still that native feel and that ability to build everything that we're used to on a Sitecore instance from a marketing standpoint, but on the speed of JSS that I want to get across. If that's the one thing that I make known from this presentation, is from a marketing standpoint, the flexibility and everything that I'm used to being able to do at a speed that just feels more native. Built on JSS. That's what we gain from all of this. So let's just take a look at this, and we have to really go back to the best practices and the basics. And when you joined us on this journey of this site, you started with a URL. You basically chose rock, R&B, or country. I know there's way more music styles than that, but we picked three, and then that's where we went. So you went through this, but what happened when you did that? Well, you had a campaign ID that was tied into it, and Corey is highlighting it right now. Thank you, Vanna. So you can see the Sitecore campaign ID highlighted in the URL. That was attached to this. So from there, we took, what is anonymous data? You were anonymous participants, and we already tied a campaign to you. And within that, we have also added in some facets that allowed us to basically parse out, is this, and what kind of event is this? What are we looking at from that standpoint? So these campaign IDs are serving up data for us. So we're moving slowly from anonymous to more known. And couple things that's happening. So besides just giving some ticks up in the campaign ID and in Sitecore Analytics, we're taking these campaigns and the taxonomy, and we're driving analytic data. So we're being able to know that based on campaign IDs and facets and all of these pieces, who's traversing the site, but you're still anonymous. So a profile is starting for you. So there's a profile in the experience profile off the launchpad. We can get into that in a little bit, but there's a profile that's starting for you, but it's still coming in as anonymous. But there is a cookie being placed. So now, how do we take that further? We want to basically go from your anonymous persona to a known user with a name and beyond. And that's where we had to reach into what you went to next. You clicked, in the case of Rock, you click stand up and shout, and you got served up a form. This is where we're going to start to take you from anonymous and get a little more information about you and move you forward. Problem was, forms in JSS are not quite ready for prime time. They're not getting along completely yet. So without that support, we had to innovate a little bit, and I'll give it back to Corey to talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yep. So as Rick said, Sitecore Forms and Sitecore 9, the support isn't there yet in JSS. It's supposed to be coming at some point. We don't know when, but it's definitely on Sitecore's roadmap. So in the meantime, it's up to us as developers to build those forms out. At the moment, Rick can't do that. If Rick goes and watches Pluralsight and learns React, he can, but until he does that, he can't build those forms himself.
I certainly don't want to build it in web forms for marketers, because that's going away.
Right, that's going away. Rest in peace. Yeah, so we need to build these forms ourselves. Each of the client-side frameworks has some libraries that make it easy, right? Like React has Formic is one of them I know of that makes it easy. But actually, this form that I built here, I just used pure React. It wasn't that hard. So let's kind of talk about some of the gotchas with forms and JavaScript services. So as Rick mentioned, cookies are important with Sitecore. Cookie Monster loves cookies. So does Sitecore Analytics. And if you've worked with MVC for any amount of time, you've probably come across this HTML helper visitor identification. Basically, this is just responsible for when you're navigating around a site. This is what actually sends the cookie to your users so that you can start tracking them. Whenever I first started doing JavaScript services, I immediately started looking for this, right? Is there like some kind of React component that allows me to put this on the page? And the answer is no. The kind of brains behind JavaScript services is something called the layout service. So, right, there's a pipeline in Sitecore, the MVC rendering pipeline, that actually does all the server-side rendering from your controller and view renderings. What the layout service does is actually it uses that same pipeline, but instead of returning HTML, it returns JSON for your client-side frameworks to use. So that layout service actually emits this cookie for you automatically. So if you start doing JavaScript services, just remember what I say here, you don't need this anymore. Layout service is going to take care of it for you, which is quite nice. But there's a big trick with the cookies. So your number one goal as a Sitecore developer and your number one desire as a marketer using the Sitecore platform is to have your visitors identified, as Rick was saying earlier. The anonymous profiles are helpful, but identified profiles are even better. So whenever you're posting data from a form, you always want to run identify as from the current session, like I'm doing here. Notice that I'm using this from an API controller. So when I built this site out, I wanted to kind of prove the point that you don't need MVC anymore. So I use an API controller instead of the standard MVC controller here. That's fine, it works. But again, the point is you want to run identify as whenever you're posting your form data back to your server. But this identify as method needs your cookie. And when you're working in React or you're working in Angular or Vue.js, you don't want to use jQuery anymore. You want to start working against the native JavaScript APIs. And the way to do like a get or a post with the native JavaScript API would be using like the fetch API. You could use another library called Axios if you want, but it's going to have the same problem I'm about to talk about. By default, the fetch API does not send cookies over the wire. All right, I'm going to repeat that. By
Please
default,
do.
the fetch API does not send cookies over the wire. That's a really important thing to remember. I spent a day working with Rick on this because whenever he would go and submit the music form, for some reason, the personalization stuff wouldn't happen after that. And again, it came down to the fact that the fetch API does not send cookies whenever you do a post or a put or any kind of operation like that. So when you're working with the fetch API and you're doing a post, make sure that you always put this credentials same origin in your request body, right? If you remember one thing, remember this, because this will save you a lot of headache. Axios, I believe, has the same problem if you've ever heard of that library. This is actually supposed to be changing in the fetch specification. This has kind of been annoying for developers coming across this problem. So like, really modern browsers like the latest version of Chrome, you might not need this, but somebody on iOS 11, for example, does need this, right? And iOS 11 isn't a very old operating system. Like the version of Safari on that isn't old, and it does need this. So it's just good to go ahead, and if you're working in JavaScript services and you're posting the forms, always put this credentials same origin in your request body. Don't forget that.
I still use a Motorola flip phone, so I don't think it works with that.
Yeah, I don't think Sitecore works at all for you, Rick. And that's fine. Okay, so that's cookies. The next thing is cross-site request forgeries. So this is it's a pretty serious vulnerability that you need to be aware of. I don't have time to go into the details about exactly how this exploit works, but if you've not heard of it before, it's good to get familiar with it. Again, it's cross-site request forgery, abbreviated CSRF, CSRF, as you see there in the graphic. But MVC out of the box comes with a pretty easy mitigation. There's this HTML helper that you see here that you can put inside of your forms, HTML.anti-forgery token. Sitecore Forms does this for you automatically, and I believe Web Forms for Marketers actually did it as well. But basically what this HTML helper does is it emits a cookie and a hidden input field that you can then check for whenever you're posting data back to your controller in MVC. So you can put this validate anti-forgery token attribute on there, and it validates that the anti-forgery token is there. It validates that it's correct. And if it doesn't, returns a bad request status code to the user and doesn't process the input. But if you're working with JavaScript services, you probably want to use something like Web API instead of MVC, and you don't have these facilities. Again, Web API doesn't have that baked in like MVC does. So take note of this URL. This URL is actually going to take you to Microsoft's documentation on CSRF. This explains exactly what the exploit is, how it works, how anti-forgery tokens prevent it, and then it's actually going to give you a solution to do anti-forgery tokens in Web API. I'll be writing a blog post about how I did that for this sample site because I actually did have anti-forgery tokens there when you were submitting the music form. So watch me on Twitter sometime after this weekend, and I'll have a blog post or two up on that. So that's CSRF. Last but not least, GraphQL. So graph query language. Rick, you want to tell them what that is?
Oh, absolutely. GraphQL is the world's best select statement.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
Rick said it's the world's best select statement according to the JavaScript services documents. So that's not it's not SQL, it's graph query language, and basically this is just an efficient query language for your APIs. So how does this tie into our forms? Well, don't worry about the content here.
Don't write this all down.
Yeah, don't write this all down. I promise you don't need to know. But so whenever we were building out that form, right? If we were using Sitecore Forms, Rick wants to trigger an outcome or a goal whenever that form is submitted. Sitecore Forms makes that easy. You just put a submit action on there, and then boom, everything goes. But I had to implement that myself for Rick so that he could select which outcomes and which goals he wanted to be triggered when that music form was submitted. So I added a couple of fields for him in Sitecore, a goals and a outcomes field. And yeah, so by default, this is what the layout service was emitting for just one outcome and just one goal. And this is a ton of data. It's right, like for the goals and the outcomes, whenever I'm processing that on the server, the only thing I need for each of those is the ID. I don't need the whether or not the monetary value was applicable. I don't need to know what the name of it was. I don't need to know the group. I don't need to know what picture Rick chose for the goal to show up in the experience profile, right? This is all superfluous information. It adds to the payload, slows down the site a bit. It leaks details out that don't need to be leaked. So that's where GraphQL comes in. And GraphQL actually lets you reshape that data that comes from the layout service to exactly what you need. So you can almost think of, like, with the layout service, you don't have a controller anymore, right? Like, it's basically just spitting out data to your view, which is React or Angular or Vue.js. So GraphQL kind of acts as the controller and lets you kind of get in there and do something with that data, map it, reshape it to exactly how you want. Like in this case, I was able to use GraphQL to reshape the outcomes and the goals to just the target IDs. So we'll hop over into Sitecore and I'll give you a quick demo of that.
Corey, while you're doing it, there's a couple questions that came in. I'm just going to throw them your way and we can hold them till later. But JSS and REST, or should we use GraphQL only?
Both.
Both.
Absolutely. Okay. Yep.
And then once the front-end developer develops the apps, will a front-end developer need to deploy as an app in Sitecore?
Yes, sir. Yep. And we'll talk about that in a second.
Yep,
So
high-level answers. Thank you.
So here's the analytics section that I added into the music form. You can see, Rick could choose the goals, he could choose the outcomes, and he did choose these. Thank you, Rick.
And a little quick piece, so Corey had to build, because we are building the forms, and he had to build in the ability for me to trigger goals. So the power remained for the marketer to still be able to apply the goals by Corey building out what he did.
So if we go to the music form, and this is the thing that was actually triggering those, one thing I'll point out is you'll notice that this isn't a controller rendering, right? This is a JSON rendering. So I'll zoom in a little bit. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but JSON rendering. This isn't a controller rendering. This isn't a view rendering. It's a new type for JSS. But if we scroll down, you'll notice this interesting field here, component GraphQL query. So this is where you can actually specify a query for your rendering to reshape the data source. And this is pretty cool. Like, it's a browser, it's got autocomplete and everything, but before I demo it, we need to give it a little bit of information. So it needs a couple of variables. It needs the context item and the data source item. So we'll go pick on the rock survey. So let's see, we'll go down to the rock survey route and we will pick its path for the context item. That there. And then we'll get the music form path for the data source. And then if we execute this query, this is what the layout service is going to return for basically the rendering data for the music form. And you can see that if we look down here, the outcomes and the goals are returning just the target IDs. And that's all I'm asking for over here on the left side, which is pretty cool. If I go back and I just select JSS, this is going to emit everything for the goal. Okay, so there's some bug there, fine. We can get autocomplete whenever we're doing this. So if I go and do target items, I can get the ID of every goal, or I could get the name of every goal. So I can do like this. And again, you see I get autocomplete from a schema, which shows me what I have available. Like, I could choose display name if I want. And when we execute this, you can see that right now it's for the goals. Instead of returning the IDs, it's returning the display name of each of the goals. Rock form submit. Okay, so that's GraphQL. That's pretty cool, pretty powerful. I think you guys are really going to love it. Yeah, so we've kind of taken you guys on this journey of, right, we start off with a campaign. You go and submit a form. That form is triggering some goals and some outcomes and identifying you. And the whole reason we're doing that is for the experience profile. So Rick, you want to take it away and talk about the experience profile for a moment?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and let's kind of recap the journey for a second here, and just talk about where we left off. And in your journey was heading through a campaign ID that you were anonymous, and we took you to somewhat of a known user through a form, and we end up here where we have some results in the experience profile. So if everyone goes through, we can pile on the data, but if you look at the visit duration, we're talking minimal, 1 second here, and it's just we can start to look at how much information we could gain over time. But we basically went from an anonymous to a known user. So let's if we don't mind, and you can pick on somebody, let's pick on somebody in the audience here.
We'll pick Amit. Okay.
All right. So you're going to see the timeline across the top, which shows that the campaign was triggered. There's a little megaphone icon there. There's a basically a duration and a visit indicator, and we have a general overview on this page, and we can get some with GeoIP we can gather some information. But the other thing we were able to do was we were able to start looking at adding images. So for anyone that's been looking at Sitecore marketing for any period of time, in this details pane, you see the right, in this case, a purple robot with a mustache, because all robots have mustaches, evidently. You can see an icon there that's replacing the silhouette, and this may seem like a gimmicky or a toy almost, but I'll tell you, when you're thinking about considering syncing Sitecore through XConnect, for example, or Sitecore Connect to Salesforce, for example, or any other CRM tool, being able to tie these tools together and being able to provide images is a powerful thing. So we're seeing robots right now. If anyone happened to, there we go.
Hey, there we go. We got lucky. All right.
So Corey, why don't you explain this? So this was clever, I thought.
Yeah, this is kind of cool. So the silhouette, as Rick was saying, is pretty boring, that you see here in the experience profile. So it's not very hard to actually go in and implement integration with a service called Gravatar. Obviously, Arun is familiar with it because he's registered for it, but Gravatar basically lets you, it's like a microservice that lets you associate an avatar with your email address. Most services like Facebook and LinkedIn, for privacy reasons, will not let you just go and query their service by somebody's email address and get an avatar, but Gravatar does. And yeah, so this is pretty cool. Like you can see, I just basically sent Arun's email address to that. We get a nice picture of him. It makes Rick happier whenever he's working in the experience profile. But for those of you who haven't heard of Gravatar before, wow, 2 in a row, that's unbelievable.
If you get a third, you're gonna have to stop. All right.
Yeah, if I get a third, it's over. But yeah, so for those of you that don't have a Gravatar account set up, it actually lets you like specify a unique image to get back, and one of them is called RoboHash. So what this actually does is generate like a unique robot avatar for your email address. So Amit's robot is completely unique. No one else will have this pink robot with a mustache, which I think is pretty cool. And it just kind of makes the experience profile more fun for your marketers. And it's not hard to implement.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're looking up records in the CRM, that it becomes recognizable. So again, hopefully, where those of you that have embraced Gravatar, it can actually help marketers out. Or maybe you don't want them to have that, but if you don't, then you become a slender, in this case, gray robot with an antenna on their head. So besides the timeline and the cool Gravatar and location, you can dig in a little bit into the activity tab here and start to drill down, and you'll see that even under here, there's a campaign, there's like a sub navigation that basically has campaigns and outcomes. And if you look at Corey, right under campaigns, if you can click on that, awesome. Yep. So you'll see, the country, genre, campaign, you can drill into that and look at the actual page activity and the touch points and the goals triggered. So unbeknownst to you, there were also goals put on the pages. And there you can see that there's a survey with a value of 0 and a completed the survey with a value of 100 points. So that 100-point value is really key for all of the marketing applications, because that's where you can drive test value when you're doing A/B or multivariate testing to see who has the highest values per visit and value that matters to the organization. So that's key. So when you start looking at all of the activity that's available that you can monitor between outcomes and campaigns and channels and goals, and by the way, this is all extensible. So those set of tabs there where it's like overview, activity, profile, and details, that can start to build out into commerce, and you can add more tabs and be able to build that out even more. But if you then look at any of the profiles that we set up, you'll see on the bottom here, best pattern match. In the lower left, it says rocker, right? So that's something that we've learned just from a profile, behavioral based profile that said, you chose the rock genre, so that's where that shows up. So again, let's look at what we know in a minute, but now let's take that even further and start to begin to use this data, and this is where we can move into this automation application. So Sitecore 9 has a vastly improved marketing automation tool set, and in this case, we utilized it for email, pretty much just email and list management. You can go a lot deeper. There's an entire drag and drop toolbar that allows you to build these automation plans. And I always say, let the business lead this decision. But again, all still built on top of this JSS environment that Corey put together. So what you're seeing now on the screen is really a two-way split. So you may or may not have noticed when you came in, but there was you had the opportunity to change your mind. So, at the bottom, you can see where it says, yes, I'm indecisive. Do you want to change your music genre? So I wanted to basically change, between whether you were decisive or indecisive, because I wanted to send you different emails. So if you did happen to choose change your mind, you will have gotten an email that basically said, we noticed that you must like all types of music because you picked one and then you picked another. And if you were decisive, it said, you decisively chose rock, or you just decisively chose country, etc. So where this came in is we have a listener that can basically start to parse out, and it all starts at the very top with a marketing lead, and that is based on an outcome that, so that was another piece that we used to basically say, hey, you've delivered, you've met this outcome value, and that's the confirmation of it all. And so then we sent you down this journey, and it splits into two. So why does it split into two? Well, that decisive, indecisive, but now there's on each side, there's 3 sets of emails: rock, country, and R&B. So that's what you're seeing there. I've basically split down the middle, if you can vision that with me. So from there, it was basically logic that basically said you chose rock. If you didn't, then you chose country. If you didn't, then you chose R&B, et cetera. And it works on that funnel. And I could make these each, just a single email on each side with personalization in the email. But what I really like about the automation tool is the report view. And that's why I parse it out this way. So it's not just, one email with personalization and a variant email. I wanted to be able to look real time, and this is near real time as people flow through the system. So you click on this report view like Corey did, and you can start to see how people have moved through the system, and you can see total context, and you can see everything move through each position. So people that have hit the position, people that have moved through, so there's that the current context of the top, why it says 0 is because everyone's just basically moved through. There's no one sitting in that state anymore. So it just kind of funnels you through, and you can start to pick on each one of these and have a great visual. So this is where we've come, from an anonymous user. You came to a site to you triggering goals, outcomes, campaigns, facets. I mean, and you have a robot, that may be identified to you, or your actual photo, and you have an entire contact profile card. Then we sent you emails, okay? And I will be blogging about this automation piece in the near future. So please, if you do follow me on Twitter, I will follow back on this with a blog post around the deeper dive in automation. I spoke at the MVP Summit this year, and I'm excited about this tool. But then we went to EXM, and we utilized EXM as well in Sitecore, and we're able to take this one step further. And this is where Corey got exceedingly creative, because JSS was not officially licensed, if you will, if that's the right word, officially approved for email, but he got it working. And yeah, Corey, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say on the emails. I mean, as Rick mentioned, I did get JavaScript services actually working with the emails. So kind of the trick there is that, I've been talking about client-side rendering a lot, and actually with any of them, React, Vue.js, or Angular, the very first request that you make to a site in Sitecore is going to be server-side rendered, and that's just for SEO purposes, right? Like the Google crawler probably doesn't execute JavaScript. It may now, but it needs to actually get HTML to parse your site. So the very first request made to your site is server-side rendered, and so you can take advantage of that with the EXM. Build your entire emails with React, which I did. They can be experience editor friendly, so depending on how fast or slow the experience editor decides to be, I can show that off. But yeah, so this is all, like you can see up here in my toolbar, the React developer tools are lighting up because this is a React app. It's fully experience editor friendly. And yeah, if you check your email, you should have gotten an email that was generated from React and JavaScript services, which is pretty cool.
And not just generated like that, but I mean editable in Experience Editor. The promise of EXM for the marketer, right? And so to be able to do that, like Corey is doing on the screen, and visually, what you see is nearly what you get, as I always say. Yeah, but it's that kind of editing that is always has been the promise of Sitecore, and this is all just using JSS.
Yeah, I wouldn't run out expecting support from Sitecore for this. I think the JSS team was kind of surprised that I even did this in the first place. So maybe just put this one down as a cool proof of concept for now.
You scared the beard off of Cam's face.
Yeah, yeah. I neither condemn nor condone using this in production. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Yep. So this was kind of a contest, whoever submitted on the forum. So with a contest, let's pick a winner. So I've actually written a console app that will run out to XConnect in Azure and pull your data and randomly select one of you guys who submitted the form to be a winner. So let's go ahead and do it. Unfortunately, we don't have any prize to give away except for bragging rights. So you can go brag on Twitter that you were the winner, which I think is a prize in and of itself.
Pretty big deal, yeah.
So which of you is going to be the winner? And again, this is all running in Azure. Actually,
XConnect. That's
XConnect. Yep, this is
advantage of that tool.
Using XConnect. We've got a winner. Who's it going to be? Congratulations to Abhay Dar. Congratulations, my friend. You like rock and metal. I appreciate your choices. I appreciate you attending. Take a screenshot if you like. Go on Twitter, brag that you are the winner. I'll retweet. Rick will retweet. Okay. Yep. Thanks, guys. What?
Corey, there was one question by Pradeep. Do you see that on the screen that I didn't get to ask?
Yeah, we'll wrap up. But he's Abhe's very happy right now. So am I, actually, honest. Congratulations, man. That's great. So I'm going to be putting the source code up for all of this on GitHub. I can't tell you when this will be up there. Probably it's going to be up after 9.1 is officially released, because there are going to be some changes I need to make. But if you take a picture of this URL and just watch this, I'll tweet whenever I've got the code up there. So stay tuned. I'll get it up there once Sitecore 9.1 is out. Rick, you want to say a big thanks?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I was I was cheering on up. Hey, yeah. So this is, this is our thanks to our team and honestly, so the folks at Proficient Digital who have helped us on this journey. Certainly the Symposium folks, which this is all started from, and a good friend of ours that has helped with a little bonus with the application here. So Corey, why don't you give that shout out to Raja?
So one of the things I didn't really have time to go into is that JavaScript services actually enables you to run your site on Docker. So the site that you went to was running on Docker. That wasn't running on a Sitecore CD. And my friend Raja Ayapsetti, who you can see pictured here, good friend and mentor of mine, actually helped put that together. So big thanks to him. And of course, big thanks to the organizers of SUGNCR for putting this together and having us on.
Yeah, thank you guys, everyone.
Yep. So I have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, I think we covered all the ones that were in the chat. So if you have new ones and want to throw them in the chat or however we want to handle that.
Yeah, I see.
There is one question from Pradeep. I'm not sure if we covered that.
Yeah, I see that one. Okay, so your question is, what do we do if if you get like a duplicate ID string value? Yeah, so I mean, GraphQL is just reading from this field, like this is a multi-list field, right? So GraphQL is just reading from it as is. I mean, I've never actually tested a duplicate ID, but we can do that really quickly. I think we picked on the rock page. So if we go under JSSMA and we go under rock and we go under survey, page components, do raw values, don't need standard fields. So yeah, if I go to like goals and pipe a duplicate ID, yeah, that's fine. You can see we've got rock form submit selected there twice. We'll put this back to target IDs. You're
Corey,
getting
you are faster than YouTube.
Yeah, so this stuff right here is coming from the experience editor. Ignore this, but yeah, I mean, you can see that GraphQL is just basically reading straight from the multi-list field. So if you've got duplicate IDs, okay, you might need to handle that in code. But I mean, generally, unless you're like messing with standard or raw values, like I just did, you're not gonna have duplicate. You shouldn't have duplicate IDs. Like I don't think that I can select rock form submit again here in this field. Is there any standard defined for JSS like Helix? There are a couple of trains of thought there. Some people think that Helix has no place in JSS because Helix is a MVC, is kind of an answer to some problems in MVC. But as I mentioned earlier, a good friend of ours, Jean-Francois Leroux from Coveo, he actually did a presentation at Symposium the morning after hours called JSS and Helix that you'd probably be interested in. That's up on YouTube. So if you just go search for it, then you can watch that and hear his arguments for JSS and Helix. Let's see if I can. Yep, here it is. This is a really good presentation. I'll put the link in chat. You can check that out later. No, friends don't let friends use Habitat as a starter kit. Helix is fine.
Oh, Habitat. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll edit that.
I mean, if you're curious, like whenever I was building this site out, I'm kind of using the Habitat folder structure. What they lay out, and if you're familiar with that, right? Like I've got a source folder with feature, foundation, and project. In project for my website, I've got code because I do need a place for backend code like config and stuff. I put my JavaScript services stuff under an app folder, right? So you can see I've got app, code, serialization, proxy. That's my stuff for Docker. Email's the same, right? Got some backend stuff like the Sitecore configs, app, serialization. So that's one way you could handle it. I think Jean-Francois, instead of calling this folder app, he calls it front end, but that's up to you. So how does the merge happen between the front end app and Sitecore app? Okay, so when you're working in disconnected mode, there is actually an import option in JavaScript services so that you can take all of those YAML files that I was showing you guys earlier and import them into Sitecore as items, which is awesome. So if I go back to the content editor, I do just want to call out the fact that like I didn't make any of this stuff and neither did Rick. All this came from the import process. Rick modified some of it, but to my knowledge, I don't think he actually made any of these items.
No,
So
I just worked on the content.
yeah. So when you're working in disconnected mode and you do an import, all of these items are actually imported as protected, I believe. I think I like turned that off, but they're all imported as protected and they're in workflow. So what'll happen is if a content editor, okay, say you did an import from JavaScript services disconnected mode, all that stuff will be in workflow. It's not editable. It's protected. If a content editor does make a change to it, it'll move that to a state in workflow where any subsequent import from disconnected mode won't overwrite that item. But I mean, generally, you don't really want to get into that kind of scenario. Like if you're getting to a point where you're importing content into Sitecore, I mean, I think you kind of just need to draw a line in the sand, like do one import, and then from that point, start working in connected mode.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we are exactly on the time, and
All right.
it was a really great and insightful session. We really appreciate it, guys, and thank you so much for sparing your valuable time today for us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, very
And
much. Thank you.
yeah, we hope to see you soon again for SUGNCR or any other Sitecore user group here in India, and we'll be more than excited to join your sessions in the near future as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, friends.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Had a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot.
Everyone have a good day.
Thanks. Bye bye. Good night.
We'll have a good night.
Right.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.